Hi everybody, this is Jonathan from Gravitee. Today I want to talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, which is API ops. Now, what better way to kick it off than to show you a little demo of what we're going to do here. I'm going to go ahead and open up my Gravitee API Management Console. And as you can see here, I'm searching for an API with the name sample, but it's not showing up. Now, as an API publisher in this company, the way I can go ahead now and create an API is to create an OpenAPI definition. So here's a very simple OpenAPI definition with a name, my sample API. And I'm also going to provide a properties file to give a bit of extra information about what I want my API to look like in terms of what is the endpoint, the entry point. Do I want to enable an API key plan? What environment do I want to deploy this API on? So I'm providing very minimal input to the system, a properties file with an OpenAPI definition. Now, if I go ahead and commit this to Git, I have a GitHub repository somewhere that I'm pushing this to. This is going to trigger an APIOps pipeline, which is going to automatically go ahead and create this API. So I'll give it a few seconds, and within no time, you'll be seeing my API show up. There it is, my sample API, and here is the path that I set, which is example path. Excellent. So as an API publisher, all I need to do is publish an OpenAPI definition and some configuration parameters, and I get my API here in Gravitee API Management. So how does this work? Let's dive into it. So basically, as I described, the platform here I'm providing as a platform engineering manager is a way for API publishers in my company to just provide a properties YAML file and an OpenAPI definition in order to create APIs in Gravitee. So what happens is, as a developer, I'm going to commit those two configuration files to a Git repository, and that will trigger a GitHub action. So this GitHub action is watching the repository for any changes to these two files. And if ever it sees a change, it's going to generate a new CRD, so a custom resource definition, or a resource that can be read by the Gravitee Kubernetes operator. So it's basically going to create a API definition resource for GKO. Now, on my Kubernetes cluster here, I have Argo CD set up to listen to any changes for CRDs in that repository. So when the GitHub action updates that CRD or creates it, the Argo CD tool is going to notice that change and then apply that change on the cluster. And because it's an API definition CRD, the Kubernetes operator will pick up that change and try to reconcile the API definition, which for it will mean pushing it to the Gravitee API Management Console to create the API, which is what we're then seeing in the UI. Very cool stuff. So how does this all work? Let's jump into a bit more detail. So the starting point, as we saw, was as a developer, I'm able to just edit an OpenAPI definition and a properties file. So the pipeline I've set up will be extracting certain information from my OpenAPI definition, and we can play around with what bits of the OpenAPI definition we want to use in this pipeline. So far, I'm extracting the title and the version. The properties file is allowing me to give input as to what the context path will be for the API in terms of being exposed on the Gravitee gateway, and what is the backend service that I want to proxy. I also have the option of adding an API key plan to my API. And I also have this option to configure on which environment I want to deploy this API. So when I push these to GitHub, what I'm doing right now is I have a repository with everything stored inside it. So if I refresh this repository now, we'll see that I've uploaded that OpenAPI file and the properties file. The other thing that you'll see here is a file called generatecrd.js. So this is a little JavaScript function which takes my OpenAPI and my config file as an input and generates a Gravitee custom resource definition for the Kubernetes operator. So you can see here a templated custom resource definition for my operator, where I'm creating an API definition, and I'm setting a lot of data from the OpenAPI and also from the properties. Now, this script is going to run thanks to a GitHub action. So here, if I go to my GitHub actions, you'll see I've got a generate Gravitee CRD action. If I open up the code for this action, then you'll see here that basically this is going to react to changes to those two configuration files that the developer, the API publisher, is pushing, and that the job is going to check out the repository, set up node, install a quick dependency, run my script that's going to basically take as input the OpenAPI and the properties file and generate a CRD. And then at the end, it's going to commit that CRD back to the repository. So once that happens, so if we go back to the repository here, you'll see that this Gravitee CRD.yaml was generated just recently. So that's now in the Git repo. Now I need to get it from the Git repo into my cluster. So if you look here, I have a Minikube cluster running on my machine, and I have a Argo CD application running, and I also have the Gravitee Kubernetes operator running here as well. Now I've already created a Argo CD application, so I can get the application I've created here already on Argo CD, and you can see that it's basically pointing to that repository. And I've got auto sync activated, and you'll see that it's showing me the Kubernetes resources that it's found in that repo, which is that generated CRD, and it's telling me that the status is synced and healthy. So what happens is when Argo CD sees that this CRD has changed on the Git repository, it's automatically going to do a kubectl apply. And that kubectl apply is going to get picked up by the Gravitee Kubernetes operator, which is why if I now do kubectl get API v4 definitions, which are the Gravitee API definitions managed by Gravitee, you'll see that I've actually got one here created in the default namespace. Okay, so that's the end-to-end pipeline. And so what's great about this overall flow is that now I can go back into my code editor and I can do something like this. I can change my name here. Let's call it the Pet Store API. And I can change the endpoint exposed, and I can make it the Pet Store/Pet Store. Excellent. So now I've just made those two changes. Let's commit them back to Git again. Update my API. Commit. Now I can push that back to Git. And if we pop into Git now, what you'll see is if I go to my actions, you'll see that this GitHub action has been triggered. And it's running through those steps one by one, checking out the repo, running the conversion script, pushing back into the repo at the end. Now, once that's done, okay, the job is finished executing. If I come back into Gravitee API management and I look for my sample API, it's now become the Pet Store API and the endpoint has changed. If I open up the Pet Store API, you'll see that I have, for example, my API plan here that was added automatically as I asked. So a very cool way to build an APIOps platform that starts from OpenAPI and some additional properties, and that ends up deploying APIs all the way through to Gravitee API management. Thanks a lot for watching, and be sure to check out the Git repository so you can try this out yourself. It is a public repository available here. Here's the URL in case you want to locate it. And please do also check out the blog post we'll be releasing with the similar content. Thank you very much. Catch you soon.